All right, we're about to get started. It's minutes after 6. Want to make sure we're conscientious of our time for next time. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I know that it's valuable. I'm Brandy Howard, Chapter Chair, Moms for Liberty here in Hamilton County. Moms for Liberty is a national organization on a mission to support parental rights at all levels of government. We believe that parents are the best decision makers for their children. We work to educate and empower parents and encourage them to get engaged more than maybe we've seen in recent years. We need parents to step up and get involved. Tonight, we're focusing on an issue that's a top priority for parents: school safety. Parents are concerned about bullying and violence happening in schools. It's hurting children and hurting our teachers, and it's hindering students' ability to learn. Students, teachers, staff, and the community deserves safe schools. We've got to figure out how to make that happen. We are really fortunate to have Scarlett Valdez here with us tonight. She's going to teach us about restorative justice, or restorative practices, sometimes it's called, and how that's impacting schools locally and across the country. I've got a bio here. The screen turned off. Okay. Starlin is the Public School Advocate Associate for Parents Defending Education, where her full-time job is assisting parents and equipping them with resources to successfully advocate for their students. She's the Senior Fellow for Parents Defending Education Action. Parents Defending Education is a national grassroots organization dedicated to reclaiming our public schools from activists and imposing harmful agendas. So join me in welcoming Scarlett Valdez.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for the introduction, Brandy. I'm so thankful for Moms for Liberty for hosting this event this evening. Restorative justice is a topic that not many people know about, yet it's implemented in so many school districts across the country. We've all seen those TikTok videos where students are just going at it pretty violently. And you also see teachers getting hurt, teachers getting knocked out. Maybe you've heard some stories of it happening. Maybe you've seen it on Facebook or TikTok, but it's unfortunately happening and not much is being done about it. And while restorative justice may not be the entire thing causing all of this violence, it is one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase of violence within our school system and to our teachers as well. So let us begin. Brandon did a pretty good job introducing Parents Defending Education, but we are a national grassroots organization focused on reclaiming our public schools back from activists or imposing harmful agendas. So what I do on a daily basis, I help parents across the country become empowered to re-engage in their child's public education. And we also encourage them to speak to the local officials, learn how to speak in school boards, learn how to speak to the media, learn how to speak to principals, and any other person that's a stakeholder in the public education system. So take notes, write down your questions, because we're going to have a pretty awesome Q&A session right after. I don't want to spend the entire time talking because this event is really for you all. I want you all to have an opportunity to ask as many questions as you want about this topic, because we all deserve it. You're a taxpayer, so ask all the questions. All right, we already went through that. Okay, so restorative justice. What happened? Why is it even in our school system? So in 2014, the Obama administration's Department of Education sent a very friendly worded letter to school districts across the country saying, hey, if you are disciplining minority students at a higher rate than white students, we're going to investigate you. And so what did the school districts do? They stopped reporting data, and they also stopped suspending minority students at a higher rate than white students. So I see a problem with that. Mexican American, and if I were to ever act a fool in school, my mom would have, well, you know. In 2018, the Trump administration's Department of Education formed a federal commission on school safety and told the school districts, hey, you know that letter that the Obama administration sent, you can disregard, we're going back to business as usual. But that actually didn't happen. And now the Biden administration wants to bring back the what the Obama administration did and potentially codify that into law. So it would be federal law. And more, stay tuned for more information on that. We don't really know the details just yet. So that's what happened. So what is restorative justice? Restorative justice, defined by Panorama Education. And if you all don't know who Panorama Education is, they are an education tech company based on providing social and emotional learning solutions to public schools across the district. So our county actually has a contract with Panorama Education, and they provide well-being surveys to our students. And they also have dashboards, behavior dashboards, where the teachers and administrators can kind of look at what's happening with student behavior. So that's Panorama Education. If anyone has any beef on what I'm about to say about restorative justice, and you can take it up with Panorama. But Panorama Education describes restorative justice as an alternative to using punishment-based approaches to school discipline and classroom management. It is focused on repairing the harm through inclusive practices that bring together students and educators. So in theory, it sounds wonderful. It really does sound really nice. But when you put it into practice, not so much. So the concept of restorative justice is based on 3 pillars, focusing on harms and needs. So there's a lot of empathy. We want to create awareness, required to understand the harm that was done, an obligation to make things right. So really focus on justice there, and engagement. So all parties, the victim, the offender, the broader community, neighbors, anybody is involved in a dialogue and healing process of what happened when a student offends either a teacher or another student. Sounds cute, right? All right, so why restorative justice? So it was basically there to eliminate racial disparities within traditional school discipline. So, okay, to create student empowerment. So students are empowered to create social change within their schools. Sounds cute. And then to break the school to prison pipeline. I don't know how that happens. Next. So how do we identify restorative justice? How do we even know if it's within our public school system or if it's being used in the school that our child goes to? So there are several names that are used for restorative justice. So first off, we have restorative practices. So restorative practices and restorative justice are the same thing. And I actually was in a training with Panorama where they said that restorative practices and restorative justice is the same thing. So that's my source for that. And then we also have progressive discipline. And then we have PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, which kind of is a little bit of a different thing, but it leads to restorative justice anyway. So we'll just throw that in there. In-school implementation. So how do we know if it's being utilized in the school that your child goes to? So first off, you'll have a tiered school code of conduct. Does anyone know if our county's school code of conduct is tiered? You can just say yes or no.
Yes.
Right? There's restorative circles and there's restorative conferences as well. And we'll dive deeper into those. So how does this entire process work? We have proactive circles, and these proactive circles are used to develop connections within the classroom, the students, and the teacher. They get in a circle and they share experiences and concerns without judgment. So that the way that looks like is they're all in a circle. Then we have the teacher sometimes in the middle, or the teacher will be in between the circle as well. And they start asking each other questions, like, hey, how's your day going? What's your favorite color? It's very innocent questions that make the students feel connected. So not bad, right? So far. And then we also have respect agreements. And these respect agreements empower students to bring their true selves into the classroom while increasing their sense of belonging within that same classroom. So respect agreements, they're usually done before the proactive circles start, or they're also done at the very beginning of the school year, where students and teachers within the classroom, what they do is they decide on what rules they're going to follow, what expectations there are going to be in that classroom. And then everyone comes and finds their name. I've actually done this in a work environment. And you know, it sounds cool, right? And it's not bad. Then we have dialogue circles. So dialogue circles cultivate an emotionally safe and inclusive learning environment. The guidelines include getting acquainted, exploring values, and sharing stories about what has shaped a student's life. So this is what we call the restorative circle. And in the restorative circle, the questions can start very innocent and then start going into more, I guess, pervasive questions, such as like, hey, you know, what does your family believe about so-and-so? Or, you know, what do you all do every Sunday? Kind of getting into the personal life of that student. And this happens, the restorative circle happens when there has been an offense as well. So let's say that, you know, a girl slaps another girl, and there's a restorative circle. The victim and the offender are in the middle. They all get into a circle. They start off by asking innocent questions, and then they go on to have the offender explain why they did what they did. And so then everyone affirms the offender, and then the victim kind of says like, oh, well, I guess I understand why you slapped me. I'm sure that you're sorry, you're never going to do it again, right? And then it ends. And then let's say that same girl goes and slaps that girl again the very next day. And that girl gets suspended. Then they have a reentry circle, a restorative conference, where they welcome a student back from a suspension or disciplinary action. The reentry circles can include participation from students, teachers, and administrators. So they put the victim and the offender back in the room, but now there's more people. They talk about their feelings. They talk about how they're never going to do it again, but sometimes the behavior doesn't change. And an example of that is in Bellingham, Washington. This just happened recently. There is now a lawsuit. So there are some parents, a parent that is suing the Bellingham Unified School District because their daughter was demanded that she be in a restorative conference with the so that's really and now that school district is getting sued. So good with them, hopefully. All right, so now we're going to go into some examples. And these sources actually come from school districts across the country that are using restorative justice, restorative practices, PBIS, or progressive discipline in their school. So this one right here comes from Poway Unified School District. And I really wish I could give you examples from Hamilton County. However, the numerous FOIAs that I filed have not been responded to, so I'm sorry for not having specific examples for Hamilton County. California is actually a lot better at giving you information than Tennessee is.
Can you explain what that is? Because I think some people don't know what.
Oh, yes. FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Some states call it open record request. You can actually submit an open records request to receive information about what is going on within your city, your school system, your county, and your state. And anyone can do this. And there are, it's a law, you have to respond to these in Tennessee within 10 days. If you don't receive that information, you can sue. All right, so anyway, back to Poway Unified School District. This is what their school code of conduct looks like. So if you see here, it's tier 1 and it's for all students. So every single student has to go to through tier 1 before they go through tier 2 or 3. So tier 1 is culturally responsive environments, classroom strategies with accommodation planning, and classroom management in there. And in parentheses, it says likely to be sufficient for 85 to 90% of students. So what does tier 1 look like? So we have positive behavior support, so PBIS. We heard that, right? We've heard that in last slide, PBIS. Then we have classroom management strategies and routines. So this is where the teacher is expected to somehow manage the disruptive behavior before they even reach out to any school administrators or help. And then we have restorative practices, so classroom circles. Little girl throws a chair, across the classroom. You can't call the principal yet. You have to have your circle first. You cannot forget that circle. And then if that doesn't work, and we have social emotional learning curriculum. We got to talk about those feelings. We have to talk about the root cause and our entire life story before we even talk to the principal about this. We have to be firm. We have to be fair. We have to be kind and consistent, even if that student is throwing the chair. I don't know what that says. We'll move on. So that's what every single student is supposed to go through before they even go to tier 2. So really, and this really does depend on the school. Some schools are more supportive than others as to when you can call your school principal, administrator, or anyone to come help you in the classroom with the behavior issue. But some don't really receive any support at all until they try everything on tier 1. And then we go to tier 2, and these are our at-risk students. And that's intensified classroom and small group interventions likely to be sufficient for 7 to 10% of the students. So this is as behavior escalates. Then we have the behavior routine referral program, and that can be different among schools. And it's really just handing out a referral. Progress monitor data. So again, the referrals, attendance, they have to monitor that child's behavior every single day. So I mean, not only does a teacher have a million and one things to do, but now they have to go in and manage the behavior of just one disruptive child for who knows how long. Assign homeroom, implementing classroom circles. So there we go again with the restorative circles. Structured adult and mentor program, peer mentoring program. One of the things Restorative Justice does is they have a student empowerment team where students can become peer counselors, I guess, to each other. So if the teacher doesn't have time to talk through the behavior issue or do the circle themselves, then the students can help each other. They can figure it out. They're almost adults at 12 years old, right? Then we also have targeted small group counseling, the escape card. I'm not sure what the escape card is, but it sounds like, get out of jail for you. Behavior contracts and restorative practices. So that's tier 2. Then we have the tier 3 where we have the higher students and individual interventions. That's where we have more referrals. We, again, progress and monitor data. We have FBA-based interventions. I'm not sure what FBA means. And then we have intervention progress monitoring. And if you notice here, 504 IEP referral, that's when we get to tier 3. So if the child's behavior isn't improving, and there has been all of these people trying to monitor the student's behavior, tweak any plans that they have for that child, behavioral plans, then we have the option of giving them an IEP. Does anyone know what an IEP means or what it is? Can someone shout it out?
Individual education plan.
Exactly. So they can give a child an IEP and potentially put that child into a special education class.
And I'll just kind of say something about that in Hamilton County. In Hamilton County, I served on the school board 1 year, but have been involved and paid attention for quite a while. We have about 45,000 students. We have 15,000 students on IEPs. And I think that's important to point out as we keep moving over here. We've identified 15,000 students, a third of our students with IEPs. So they allow them to go extra special treatment. They didn't know any better. This is what it is. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's wanted to say that.
That doesn't include the 504 students. That number is not including 504.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that these students are then moved into these special classrooms, and they're considered special education students. And I've personally talked to a teacher in Florida that was in tears when she spoke to me because she could not manage the bad behavior in her special education classroom. I mean, it's managing a classroom with special education students isn't easy already, but now you're adding in just unruly students, disrespectful students, and putting them in these classrooms and making not only the teachers' life a living hell, but the students. We have autistic students, we have students with Down syndrome, we have some students that have very real needs that may not be able to communicate what's going on with them. And then we're putting these unruly kids to be bullied by, or we have these poor special education students being bullied by just unruly kids. I think that's completely unacceptable.
Why is our dawn school so short on students if we have these issues? The dawn school is supposed to be there, is it not? For a lot of the 504 problems, not necessarily.
No, I think most of those are exceptional.
Those are the more severe. Right.
Yeah, cases.
You know what, I would-
What we're talking about.
Hang on, I want to make sure she gets through this. Do you have a card? Write that down on an index card and make sure y'all pass them out. And we'll cover all those questions at the end because I do want to get.
Yeah. So that's what our tiered school code of conduct looks like so far. And some superintendents say that this is only a guideline and it doesn't need to be followed right by the book. So if the superintendent wants to have this be just a guideline, and other superintendents see this as, you know, their Bible, then I guess it's already inconsistent already. And not every student is having a fair shot at an education. So this is an example of a proactive circle. And this comes from Rochester, New York. And this is like a little lesson plan for the teacher. So here it says, discuss or ask what students noticed or ask. And I guess they, in this lesson plan, the teacher is reading a book about food and farms, I think. So ask students about their family time, dinner, favorite foods, family members, or extended family to stimulate discussion. You know your students to generate what questions would be most appropriate. Does anyone see a problem with a teacher asking about family time, asking about other family members? Or do y'all think that's normal?
That's huge.
That's a problem, right? It's a red flag. Yeah. So then you have to encourage students to recognize that the food helped to strengthen them for civil rights work. So, okay, but in an elementary school, and I even forgot to add that this is a lesson designed for preschool to 2nd grade. So why the heck is a preschool teacher asking a little toddler about other family members? If I think back to my 5-year-old, when he was a toddler, he was telling everyone under the sun that we were moving from Washington to Tennessee. He was telling everyone. So toddlers spill the beans all the time. So that's a red flag for me. Encourage students to recognize that the food helped to strengthen them for their civil rights work. Does a toddler understand what civil rights work is? I don't think so. You may want to reread the lines. No matter how many people came to dinner, there was always enough to go around. What does that sound like? Sounds weird to me. There was always enough food to go around, enough to strengthen, enough to comfort the family in the civil rights movement, and ask students what it means. Does a 2nd grader know what that means? I don't think so. Okay, again, that's from Rochester, New York. And then we have again, Poway Unified School District. So in the Poway Unified School District, and this is in San Diego, California, my hometown, what happens is when a child is misbehaving, they have to go through a 5-day restorative justice program or training. And in that training, they watch videos about bullying, they answer survey questions, and this is one of the survey questions that they have to ask. They have to reflect on the F word. And if you notice, this kind of looks like a Google Doc form. So it's not an official document from the school district. This is a straight up Google Doc form. So part 1, pre-education reflection, read and respond to the 7 following questions. How do you use this word? So has the student use the F word? And then we have, what thoughts and feelings come to your mind when you hear the F word? Where did you learn this word from? How do you think this word impacts people who are LGBTQ+? And how do you think this impacts other people? How might this word impact the school community? So what the heck does this have to do with academics or even discipline? I mean, that's what I think. And there's also other surveys, but I didn't want to make this PowerPoint way too long ago. And this actually comes from a school district in Georgia. And I'm sorry if I say it wrong, but it's Gwinnett, Georgia. Gwinnett, Georgia. And this is actually a training that a parent sent to me. This is the restorative justice training for that school district. And Brandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't one of the school superintendents here in Hamilton County transfer to that district?
When it came
Oh,
out.
she did.
Yeah.
Who was the interim superintendent, was Nakia Towns?
Yeah, so homegirl went there and implemented all the stuff.
Yeah.
One of the first things she did. And here, if you look at this highlighted thing here, so endeavor to eliminate this discipline, whatever that word is, and administer behavior responses consistently, progressively, fairly, and equitably. And since restorative justice was implemented in this school district, discipline is out of control. And I hear from teachers, I hear from parents, I hear from grandparents, community members telling me, Scarlett, what can I do to get this out? It just started and it's completely collapsing already. How do we get this out? So we'll see about that in a little bit. And here is restorative practices for Hamilton County. So if y'all want, after you leave this meeting today or whenever you have time, just pull up the website. All you have to do is go to the search bar and type in restorative practices, and you'll see all of the ways that restorative practices are currently used in the Hamilton County School District. You can also type in restorative justice as well. So there's a school in this county, East Hamilton High School, and I think I may have passed it, so let me go back. When I typed in restorative justice strategies, I got this right here. Restorative justice strategies, interventions designed to identify and address the harm caused by an accident or an incident and to develop a plan to heal and correct the situation. How is school discipline going on in that school right now? Is it the best it's ever been? I don't think so. And I actually found this a few months before I even knew about the issues that East Hamilton County was having. So if anyone tells you restorative justice isn't in any school here in our county, just go to the website. It's right there. It's right here. That's a screenshot. All right, so how do nonprofits in Chattanooga and restorative justice come together? I'll tell you. So Unify Ed held a pilot at Orchard Knob Elementary in 2019 to establish restorative justice. And you can go to their website. It's right there. They're very proud of it. They claim to reduce suspensions by 50%. I mean, it looks like it works, right? If you're reducing suspensions by 50%. However, you cannot find any of the discipline data. In fact, in most school districts across the country, you cannot find any updated school discipline data from 2019 moving forward. And if you ask school districts, if you ask principals, maybe you'll get it, but most of the time you will not get that data. So if you're just not reporting school suspensions, or if you're just not suspending kids at all, then obviously restorative justice is going to be effective. You're not producing any reliable data or any data at all. And what is a little bit ironic is that Unify Ed just about a month ago, I want to say, or maybe 2 months ago, conducted a teacher survey where teachers cited student-to-teacher violence as a reason for leaving the profession. So Unify Ed is very proud that they brought restorative justice into our schools, yet it's not working, and they continue to put that in our schools. And I'll tell you all, on a quick little side note, Unify Ed has personally told me that restorative justice is not working, and it's not working because it wasn't rolled out correctly, and there aren't enough trainings. So if y'all are interested in seeing that screenshot, I can always show it to you. So we have Unify Ed, one of the main culprits, but then we also have Caleb. I'm not sure if y'all have heard of Caleb, but they're all about, justice and bailing criminals out and all that stuff. But they received $70K in appropriated funds from the county commission to implement restorative practices in our county. And I'll tell you, when I went back and I looked at that transcript and I looked at that meeting, there were no questions asked. It was a unanimous vote. So our county commission from all sides of the aisle voted to give Caleb $70K in appropriated funds to expand restorative practices into our school district. Huh? All of them. David Sharp included. I'm not sure what district he's in though.
See,
Yeah, okay. So what can be done? So if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, or if you're just a community member in this meeting today, and this is the first time you've heard about restorative justice, and you're like, oh shoot, like I need to do something about this now. Well, you can. You can learn the district's code of conduct. You can learn the school's code of acceptable behavior and learn about the zero tolerance policies that we have within our school system. And then once you learn about this, you can ask that the code of conduct and zero tolerance policies be applied. And I will tell you that when you are engaging with any elected official, superintendent, school board member, teacher, anybody, please have a paper trail. So always make sure that your communication is via email, because when it's via phone call, then you can say, well, that never happened. So always make sure that you have some kind of written form of communication when you're asking questions, or you're asking that the code of conduct and zero tolerance policies be implemented in your school. And then engage your school board and superintendent when necessary. I know that sometimes we may get our feelings and get really angry and want to immediately reach out to our school board member or immediately reach out to our state legislators. But I really do encourage you to reach out to the teacher, reach out to the principal before you have to escalate to a board member or to a state legislator, whoever else you want to escalate. Engage with your school and just ask questions about it, collect the data, because they might be a lot more knowledgeable than sometimes our board members are. Not because our board members are knowledgeable, but they have so many other things going on as well. And the school principal should know that school in the back of their head. And if you're a school board member today, right now, in this room, if you're a legislator or an educator, ask for behavior transparency within the school district. Make school discipline data easily accessible to the public. A parent, a school board member, a community member should not have to fight tooth and nail to have this data be visible in any part of your website, or it should not be not easily accessible to anyone in the public. And introduce and pass resolutions to halt or end the use of restorative practices. So while restorative justice isn't working within our school system, there isn't anything wrong with wanting alternative forms of discipline within the school, right? It's fine to have different or alternative forms of discipline within the school, but not at the cost of a student being stabbed, not at the cost of a teacher being knocked out. So first, make sure that you get this under control, and when you have it under control, then maybe you can try to keep doing other things, right? Alrighty. And what has PDE done? So there isn't a lot of work yet within the restorative justice field, just because the data isn't always easily accessible. So I mean, what I've had to do is I've had to sign up for restorative justice trainings. I've had to go to trainings with Panorama. I've had to read, all of the books by Bob Costello, one of the leading figures in restorative justice. I really had to take some time to learn all of these things to even bring this presentation to you all. But what we're hoping to do with Parents Defending Education is give everyone resources easily accessible on our website, and they should be coming up soon. But what we've done already is in July of 2021, PDE created a portal to submit comments to let the Biden administration know that racial preferences don't belong in school disciplines. In July of 2020, our PDE president, Nicole Neely, submitted comments on the administration's request for information regarding a non-discriminatory administration of school discipline. We have filed FOIAs to school districts across the country to obtain restorative justice trainings. So I have filed FOIAs in the Nashville school system, in California, in Michigan, in Texas, and many other states that I can't remember at the moment, just to see what their trainings look like. And one of the concerning things as I've received information is that no school is implementing restorative practices the same way. So everyone's kind of picking and choosing what they like. Everyone's kind of just, doing train or train the teachers, and then hoping that these teachers pass this information along. So it's not even being rolled out the way that the founders of restorative justice intended it to be rolled out. So it's consequence. And if you see anything funky going on with school discipline within your school district, send us that information. We'll do everything we can to give you resources and help you throughout the entire process. So we have exposed incidents submitted by parents and community members regarding restorative justice. So one of the things that we will always do is we will always keep your identity anonymous, unless you really want your name to be out there in the world, then we'll do it for you. But if you want to be anonymous, you don't ever have to worry about PD releasing your name to anyone. And here are more restorative justice resources. So on our website, you can find questions to ask your school about discipline. So here we have some questions that you can ask your principal or school teacher about what they're currently doing with school discipline, what the specifics are of school discipline and all that stuff. And then I also sat down with Jeff Myers. He's a wonderful human being that has spent tons of time and effort researching restorative justice in Beaverton, in the Beaverton School District in Oregon. And in Oregon, in his district in specific, restorative justice has been going on for 10 years. So there's a lot of data that he's had to dig up. And what he's found is that it just isn't working. No matter how many trainings you're putting forth, no matter how much money you're using to fund these practices, it's just not working. And he has many accounts from teachers that are just fed up and they want to leave the profession immediately because no one is addressing what's going on in the schools. So if you haven't watched this already, I really do recommend that you take some time to watch it. I think it's only like 30 minutes long. All righty, well, that's what it is, restorative justice. And now we're gonna have James Walker, former school board member in District 9, right? Come join us for a Q&A session. And my colleague, Ryan, that's going to come and answer some questions about restorative justice for us. So ask away. What we can do is we can form a line, and then you can ask a question, or how do you want to do it? You're going to collect the cards? Okay.
Can I say something before we start the question?
I think it'll kind of set the tone a little bit too, and thanks for inviting us up. When all this was rolled out, Hamilton County Schools 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, the message that the teachers and principals got and was rolled out to them was, we discipline too many students of color, stop. Now, that's not what the email said, but that's how the message was received. Teachers, and also, we have a superintendent in place. I firmly believe in that he's going to lead us to some next levels. And in talking with him over the last year was what he needs from us, what he needs from the school board. I'm glad to see 3 school board members here. If I missed somebody, I apologize. But what Superintendent Robertson wants from us is to peel away things like this, that he's come in and that he's seen. And he does want our input, our voice. The school board has one employee, it's the superintendent. So we've got to use everybody that we can. And they work for us and they're going to be our voice there. But that's when it really happened. And they quit disciplining students. Hamilton County overall population is 70% white. And I do not want to make this a white or black thing. It's nothing to do with that. But it's just the facts. Overall school, Hamilton County population 70% white, 30% people of color. Our Hamilton County school system is 52% students of color, 48% white. There's a reason for that. We have 22,000 students in Hamilton County that are in homeschool or private schools. 22,000, third of our student age population. So that kind of sets a tone of where I'm coming from when I see things. Our teachers are hurting out there. When I served on the school board, I wanted to serve the students first, the parents second, the teachers, I put them in the third just because I thought they had enough people fighting. No, teachers needed us badly. So anyway, that helps set the tone before we start our questions, or I'll give it to Ryan for some input.
My name is Ryan. I work with Scarlett at Harris Defending Ed. I too am a transplant. I grew up in up in the south side of Chicago and moved down here 2 years ago. I'm a third generation educator. My dad was a dean and retired from being a dean in a low socioeconomic urban school. I actually came down here and started teaching at Howard Connect. And as you've probably heard over time, teachers leaving because of discipline issues. That's exactly what happened with me. After 15 years of education, leaving the classroom was really, really hard for me, but I can remember that day of having an 11-year-old student screaming in my face. So as we go through Q&A, I can certainly add in my personal experience into this. I've seen teachers get assaulted at school, both in Illinois and here, but it is significantly worse now than it was when I first started teaching. And so I've been on the floor, the ground floor with restorative justice and restorative practices at Howard Connect, and I've seen how they failed. And so, you know, certainly we can continue to add more to that. But my job now is I work with Scarlett and we look to expose this stuff and help to offer solutions and support where we can. So.
Yeah, all right, cool. So here we have one of the first questions. So does the school district get more funding when a student is classified as special ed?
You know, there are some other tags in that. And like I said, and when I heard somebody say 504, correct me, 504 is what we would think of as traditionally a special.
Exception.
Right.
504 is a health impairment, not an education.
Gotcha, which is what we would think of as IEP or special needs students. But yeah, there is more funding in there.
Well, it's a little different. So the 504, I can be about that. I've got a big coach's voice. The 504 is related to things that are not binding by law, to an extent. And it's a physical piece. So one of my own personal children has a 504 plan to deal with speech, for example. It's not anything that's taking away from the learning process, but it's so it's kind of like a middle ground, I guess you'd say, between the full-fledged IEP and not having an IEP. As far as I can tell, I believe definitely Title I funding comes into play with IEPs and so forth. So there is extra money attached with the IEP.
What we're talking about is students that are inclusion in classroom that have all sorts of classified and listed some sort of disability. They could be colorblind, they could be deaf, they could have dyslexic, they could be anywhere on the spectrum of autism.
Which I think is what most people that really think of an IEP is, you know, let's say, so anyway, I think that's.
And most of those kids are included in the regular classroom.
But with the new budget, just in the money following the child, and the child does have these types of things, so we
State and or federal level.
So,
Yeah.
so depending upon depending upon whatever your disability is, which could be multiple, those funds will follow you depending on each case.
And I think
There's a base, and then the more you need, the more is added to that child.
And the perception, I think, if I can help, is identify this one is this and this, we get more money. And then we see layers and layers of other people in district offices up there. So, yeah.
Which a lot of times is funded by federal programs, as you were talking about.
And I'd like to tie in, you know, to kind of also attach this to our big picture conversation with restorative justice and practices, is that having taught in inclusion classes most of my career, I've had as many behavioral problems across the board. And in fact, probably less so with a lot of my students that had IEPs. And so one of the things I want to, from a teacher's aspect, is to convey is it's discipline problems transcend a lot of these kids, regardless of their IEP status, et cetera. And I want to be very careful with that because I don't want to stigmatize children with 504s and IEPs because that can happen. I'm not saying you, I'm saying that can happen. I think we need to be very fair that I've taught with some fantastic young boys and girls who have, different impairments, autism, deaf, et cetera. But I do think on the IEP note that sometimes for example, at Howard Connect, we had a young man come in from out of state who we find out months in was supposed to have an IEP and didn't. And that was, I'm not gonna blame anybody for that one, but that process, because he's new to the district and state, had to go through the whole thing again to get his IEP. And he was causing massive problems in the classroom. We come to find out that it was also an ED issue, emotional disability. And so if we had known that up front, we would have been able to better supply him with what he needed, maybe not even being in that building, to be honest, because Howard Connect obviously is a different school in some regards. But my point being is that there are a lot of kids that go undiagnosed, and that also contributes to these behavioral issues. To kind of come back to a little defense of the teacher's aspect.
Okay, cool. So another, I think, medical question, how does HIPAA factor in if a student shares medical/mental issues in school, i.e. that the records kept confidential?
I think that falls into, if it's a elementary or middle school kid and they're sharing these in their circle, I mean, they're not mature enough, in my opinion, to handle these circles. HIPAA is not, in my opinion, I'm not a medical expert on that. Whatever an individual owns up about their own medical stuff, I can't imagine that that's something we could be held accountable for in the school system.
Right, yeah, I think so.
So Scarlett showed the restorative circles for pre-K through second grade from Rochester, New York. And if you notice, there's a key word in there that says generative. And the goal of those things is to generate a conversation that navigates or pushes the child in a certain ideological direction. And I know that's kind of high tier, but coming to the medical thing, my concern with having those conversations around circles, especially with, let's say, junior high kids. I've taught sixth grade all the way up to freshman in college. You're giving those kids weapons. I've taught long enough. I went to middle school once. I don't want to do it. Junior high kids bully, and it's wrong, and it needs to be stopped, but they bully. The test of time, they're bullies. You give kids weapons, and they're gonna get on social media. As confidential as you want to have them sign a piece of paper, it doesn't matter. Kids are kids. They're gonna go and start posting that the kingdom come on social media. So when we talk about restorative circles, it'd be fantastic if all the kids were on the same page, blah, blah, but they're kids. And kids do kids things. And one of the kids things is bullying. Heck, we have adults that bully on social media on a regular basis. So my concern with the HIPAA stuff is that, yes, the school can have HIPAA information and they legally cannot give it out, et cetera. But if they're doing stuff like a restorative justice circle, and these kids are generatively encouraged to share personal information along that level, it can be weaponized against them. I don't know if that fully answers.
I think so. Why are disruptive students prioritized over students who follow instruction and want to learn?
In my experience, and you could talk to teachers' hands are tied because of things like this and IEPs, and that student looks this way, so I can't do this. I can't treat them this way. We had at elementary school in my district, a young man would stand up in fourth grade and throw a chair in the classroom. And the teacher had a password. She would say popsicle. And the other 20 kids in the school, in the classroom, would get up 5 and go to Miss Jones' class, 5 would go to Miss Smith's class, 5 would go over here, 5 would, and that kid was allowed to stay in there and throw chairs. And I don't know how a teacher disciplines at all, or how they can. I ran into a young lady last night at Cracker Barrel. She was a teacher over at Hicks. Young lady, can't be 32, 33. Actually saw her mom and another sister, and I said, how is she doing it? She quit teaching. She was coaching. She was doing things she loved. Was a graduate of Central, was over at Hicks and giving back, and she quit. That's what she went to school for, and she's early 30s. So again, don't know if we have teachers out here. I know, I just wish that we could hear more of them. Under the last administration in Hamilton County, teachers were afraid to say anything. Teachers were like, I'll tell you something, but I can't do it. Now, again, I wasn't on the board under the last superintendent, but I've been in the community, and that is the field. You just can't say anything because the first thing that the former superintendent would say was, who told you that? What teacher said that? Who said that? I need to know. No, there was a fear. So I think under our new system that hopefully they can feel like they can speak up or they're walking away.
Yeah, and one of the things that I get, one of the questions that I get from parents are sort of justice and those circles and conferences and practice circles and respect raises. Where did you find the time to do all of this? Because some classrooms are only 40 to 45 minutes long, right? And when they have service that they need to fill out, they have classroom management they gotta do because kids are really over the winter break. Where are they finding the time to implement all of this stuff, plus focus on academics? We've got to wonder why over half of our Hamilton County public school students aren't meeting reading or math grade.
If I can unpack some of this a little bit too, and I want to say that a lot of teachers, when I worked at Howard Connect, they knew there were problems. There were massive behavioral problems. They couldn't control their classrooms. That was my number one, I guess, skill you'd say as a teacher was my classroom management. I had a private school for a long time. I couldn't even control my classroom. I might have had on days 10 minutes of actual teaching, direct good instruction. Kids on some days were better than others. I've had fights break out in my classroom, et cetera, et cetera. And the teachers know there's a problem. They sensed it. The administration even knew there was a problem. And there were times where there was conflict, I could read, between the administration and the school counselor, because it was the school counselor who thought he was doing what was best by pushing restorative justice in these practices. So for example, if a student was misbehaving in my classroom, one of the things that I would do is get into our group chat and ask the head of ISS or restorative justice room to come down and get that child. Well, he was dealing with somebody else at the time. That child still sat in my classroom and was still a disruption. In my length of teaching, though, one of the things I saw happening at the school, and I'm not saying it was it was permissible, but what was happening by de facto was kids would just get up and leave the classroom. I've never been in a school before where kids have slammed doors, and these kids were slamming doors out of anger on a regular basis. And that's your day. So on top of that, when they would get removed from the classroom, they go down and they sit in ISS, but they're not allowed to do coursework. They have to sit there and quietly think about what they did. So I'm going to pull back a little bit here. The idea with restorative justice is to keep the kids in school, especially out of school suspensions. I agree with that. We should be trying to find ways to keep kids in school, get them educated. But the problem is, how much more class time are they missing by spending time in ISS doing nothing and disrupting the education of every other student? And that's part of the big issue I have with how this is rolling out. And by the way, you can say this is wonderful in theory, and education loves a good psych fact. They love a good psychological fact. But we know from Parkland school shooting down in Florida, they employed restorative justice. Uvalde, I just looked up restorative practices. Oxford, Michigan, restorative practices. And we know from an investigation from our peer friend Max Eden, who wrote a book on Parkland and the shooting there, that restorative practices played a massive role in why that kid is still there, still in the system, able to walk into school. Now, heaven forbid, and I really don't want to see, I'm not implying that that's a thing that's going to happen here. But I saw a staff member at Howard Connect actually get stabbed by a student. I don't know if that got reported anywhere. That teacher never left the building that day. It was probably like a pencil or something. But by the way, that student hours beforehand had threatened to stab a girl in the eye. That's what we're dealing with. And I feel for that kid too. That kid needs to be in school, but that school in that situation is not appropriate, and those policies contribute to that event.
And no, you're good. In-school suspension to me is one of the biggest jokes that there is. If you're suspended, go home and be inconvenient on your parents for a little bit. You have to let them know. In my opinion, and it always has been, is that Hamilton County Department of Education gets caught up in butts and seats. So if they're an in-school suspension, they still get whatever funding for the butts and seats, and they're so worried about missing 5 days and all of those things. And again, it all kind of comes back to things like this. We can get them in a room, and we can all stay together, and we keep them. Some kids just need to be home for 3-day suspension or have some inconvenience on the parents. But I had a video sent to me 3 years before I became on the school board of a student at Brainerd High School knocking out an older teacher. Never made the TV, never made the news, probably 4 years ago. And then when I said something about it, just as a community member, I was told by a teacher at that school, that was a long time ago, don't worry about that. Because I actually saw that other person in the video. Like, how do we not hear of a teacher getting knocked out by a student? How's that? That's not even in the realm of my thinking. But anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Did Larry leave because he wanted to answer more questions? Probably this man. Why they got James up there?
All right, so how does our education system get away with sharing or influencing students' ideas on sex and use of inappropriate language? Repeat the question. Okay. How does our education system get away with sharing or influencing students' ideas on sex and use of inappropriate language?
Well, on the sex part, and I don't know if this is where this question is going, we have GSA clubs throughout the schools, gender, sexuality alliances, which celebrates every combination of every sexual position or partnership that you could have. Actually have clubs that meet in the schools. If we had a heterosexual club in the school, it would be, I as a parent would say, no, we don't need that. That's not appropriate in school. But I think under the guise that we're going to offend somebody or whatever, and when the interim superintendent was in there, they really all jumped on me when I had a problem with it at one of our middle schools. And she thought it was gay straight alliance, and that's everybody's trying to get along. No, it's not. It shows all the different partnerships and things. I mean, I've got a picture of a flag all around 20 different flags, and they represent all the different things, but we can't offend somebody, can't tell them. I talked to a teacher who is the sponsor of the one at Illinois High School, and they said, well, we have to have a sponsor for that if they want to have it. No, you don't. If I want to have a chess club, and Ryan and I have a chess club at Howard, and we don't have a teacher sponsor, then we don't have a chess club. I mean, they're just, again, on the use of foul language, I don't know how they do with that, but I called a middle school teacher Norman when I was in Brown Middle School, and I thought I was going to get tore up. You don't disrespect them, so I don't have a clue how to get away with cussing all the time.
My experience, a lot of teachers, they have their heart in the right place. But we know that sometimes that can go and lead to the wrong thing. So for example, with these GSA clubs and so on and so forth, which it's to be inclusive. They use the word inclusive, but really it's a way to get the kids into identify, to get together, right? But the thing is, it's about a political identity, if you think about it, because the way the LGBT stuff has gone now is it's really far more a political thing. And so what these clubs are doing, if you look at the data and look across the country, is you're seeing these sponsor these clubs, okay? Because they want to be inclusive, they want to give these kids a place to go and talk about their behaviors. And too many teachers they want these kids to feel part of it. I'm trying not to use this word, unfortunately, but it's a mechanism to groom these kids down that line. And I don't mean necessarily a sexual grooming. It's a cult grooming that pushes these kids. And there's things that we're investigating that I can't talk about because it's still an investigation. But we have a lot of evidence to confirm that that's the direction that these things are happening. And I hate to say it, you're just going to take my word for it right now, unfortunately. And I'm not saying it always ends there. I'm not saying that that's the type of thing that we have to be careful with. But I do think that that's an avenue for this stuff to slip in with these kids. So
And I want to say, that's a hot button for me because those clubs, that's a national organization. If you're not familiar with it, take a look at it. National organization, they instruct the leaders how to hide student participation from their parents. Those clubs have also helped facilitate things like transitioning at school without notifying parents. They have helped students manipulate the system. It was California because mom, long story, but mom wasn't helping facilitate. Mom said, we've got a mental health issue here. We've got to address that before we address gender transition. They helped facilitate that child leaving her mom's home. And that child ended up stepping in front of a train and killed herself. So if you're not familiar with these organizations and they're hiding information from parents, you need to become aware.
Can I, this, let me, and then I'll ask you a question, but the way with what I've been reading lately, and I don't even know how I won't say anything here because again, it's under investigation and so forth, but this, you wouldn't allow a club for anorexic kids at a school. Because we know from research, from long-time research, that if you take anorexic, let's say young girls, and you put them on the same floor at the hospital for therapy, they will start out competing each other. And this is the same thing. Whether people like to hear it or not, okay, because I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I worry deathly about this every day. What I've been reading is that this is what's happening with groups like this. Doesn't mean every group, it doesn't mean every teacher, but even if one place is happening, that's enough for me. And we're seeing these kids get engaged in this social contagion to where one 5th grader in a school district came out as trans. By the end of the day, 5 more of her friends were trans. My daughter is 10. She still believes in certain things at certain holiday times. But if you know what I mean? And so if 10-year-olds still believe that, they're gonna believe this other stuff. And so, you know, we've gotta be more aware. And the people that are pushing this agenda, they'll tell you TikTok is a social contagion. I've seen the literature. They'll tell you everything under the sun is a social contagion, except for one thing, the transgender stuff. And so that's my viewpoint. I've got friends who are psychiatrists and psychologists, and they've just written a paper on it. And he had to fight to get the trans stuff put in there in social contagions.
All right, next question. What are students who behave, do when the circle is in session? Or is this a separate session?
I guess this question is asking what happens during restorative services.
So slightly before I left Howard Connect, I sat through one of these. 2 students, separate events, had been misbehaving. In part of their return from their suspension was to sit in a restorative circle with the teachers that were on staff that taught that student, with his parents, with the counselor, with the administration. We would sit there, we would all tell how we felt about that student. I don't necessarily have anything wrong with it. I try to keep it positive, you know, tell you how much find things I like about that kid. But in essence, it's a form of a Maoist struggle session. If you don't know what that means, give you some homework. And at the end of it, the student is told, yes, they give you they're junior high kids. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. Yes, I'll behave. Yes, I'll do this. I kid you not, by 30 minutes into the school day, that student in the hallway is already jacking around, misbehaving again. So I don't know about you, but I know when I was in 8th grade, I got into a little boy scuffle, went called down to the principal said, don't do that again. And I went back to my room and was like, I don't know what that, right? So, I mean, at least at Howard Connect, that's how they do their restorative circles. They sit around and they talk about how the adults feel to the student and how the student made them feel, and then the kids send back to us.
All right, so what training do teachers receive? How are peer counselors trained in monitoring? We'll start with those two questions. So what training do teachers receive? How are peer counselors trained? I mean, it really does vary from school district to school district. Here at Orchard Knob, it was a 2-day teacher training. And there really wasn't much follow-up afterwards. The expectation was that the teachers that were trained would roll this out to all of the teachers, but I mean, that didn't quite happen. And I mean, we really don't know what's going on with discipline at Orchard Knob anymore because we just don't have any information on it.
And I don't know whether that it's on that, it's, whatever we call the day, the teachers don't know, staff trainers, I really don't have much experience with that.
Well, let me tell you about sometimes the teachers and teacher trainings.
Yeah.
I know for me, here, I got almost no restorative justice training. A lot of trainings about equity and so forth. They'll tie it in. I mean, I guess if you zoom out, there's, you know, things about how to treat kids and so forth. I will tell you that a lot of these trainings, especially like the mandatory professional development stuff, not every teacher, but a lot of teachers, they'll do planning, they'll play their phones. They're human beings. They're gonna do that stuff. My issue is, part of me doesn't have a problem with restorative justice if it's done in a very specific therapeutic manner. For example, if you go through Christian counseling at your church, it's a very intimate type of thing. I think that that's a place for it. However, we're trying to scale up something that is designed for a very specific intimate type of therapy. And some of these kids probably do need that. And if that they need that, maybe we should have a discussion about how we can get them those services and so forth. But we're trying to scale it as an entire education system, not just a district. We're trying to scale up something that, one, I don't believe is scalable. And two, you're asking teachers and probably even school counselors who are not equipped or trained or certified for that type of therapy to be practicing medicine, therapeutic medicine on children. And then on the third part of that is with restorative circles is you're introducing peers, kids into that therapy session. That I have massive problems with, on top of the fact that these kids can't read or do math. Every time I look at these issues with these school districts, we look at them, I always pop the data in there that these school districts have a reading proficiency of 15%, of 40%. But they're spending time on all these things. By the way, social emotional learning is part of the restorative practices ecosystem, and they're spending all this time with that stuff. And yet, you know what the real confidence booster of a kid is? That they can read. I remember working with one of my 6th grade students, and she had no phonics skills. She wanted to read here at Howard Connect. She wanted to read. She had no phonics skills. She couldn't sound out the words that she was reading. You teach that young girl to read, and then she starts to actually learn, and she feels good about herself. That's self-esteem. That's self-confidence. That's where the real SEL comes into play. Even though I don't like that term, but.
And I guess I would say that's where the school to prison pipeline would break too, because when these children are educated in reading and math and think for themselves and advance, then you don't, I mean, restorative justice isn't really necessary anymore. And I can tell you from experience that your children don't graduate with the skills necessary to go out into the workforce. And I'll tell you a quick story when I used to manage in my former job. A girl that I was training refused to read in our training class, not because she was being unruly or she was being disrespectful, but she couldn't read, she couldn't sound out words. So she would have much rather taken disciplinary action from me than put herself really embarrassed and not reading. So when I experienced it, I was like, shoot, I gotta do something. This woman, she's in her early 20s, can't read, and is expected to break down bills and is expected to read policies back to customers. How is she going to be successful? Unfortunately, she did quit on her own because she couldn't help in the way that she needed to.
And I think what we're doing with a lot of our young people is, you know, if one of the goals is to keep them going from school to prison. I think when you assault a young man or a young woman and you get to come back to school, if Ryan and I work together at the local Walmart and he beats me up, I don't think we're gonna have a little circle of justice and Ryan's gonna be gone and I'm gonna come back to work. I mean, it sounds so silly to me. That we had one of the most awful cases 6-7 years ago in one of our high schools where 3 students raped another young man. And people would be stunned to know that 2 of those offenders got to come back to the Hamilton County High Schools. They couldn't go back to the high school where the incident happened. We allowed them back in because one had an IEP and you know, they served their time, they come back. I got a call from parents in my neighborhood and they said one of those students is in the football locker room with our 2 freshman sons. Now again, I wasn't on the school board at the time, just a community person. And I'm like, you're crazy. I dismissed these 2 parents because nobody with reasonable thinking would think that those students would be back in Hamilton County schools. But we let them back in and they played football at one school and ran track at the other school. Couldn't go back to the school they offended at or couldn't go back to the school they were zoned for. But they were put back in Hamilton County schools. That's a far extreme case, but that's what happens with things like this. And we want to treat somebody dear, we don't want to hurt their feelings. You know, they served their 6 months in juvenile. You got to let them come back. No, you don't have to let them come back.
Yeah, and another story, training class, it was quite the training class. Young lady had just graduated from high school, came late to work for the 5th time. And I asked her, why are you late again? Her response, you're even lucky that I showed up today. And they do it like that. I was like, well, not today. So performance improvement plan within 3 days, she was no longer with the company. So in the real world, this stuff doesn't work and it's not tolerated in the workforce. So we really do want to set up our kids for success and there's gotta be that discipline and structure. The next part of this question is, what do Moms for Liberty and PD offer as an alternative behavior modification and discipline? So if restorative justice doesn't work, then what should we do?
Well, I'm not on either one of those official groups. I think there's a lot of common sense that is in there. Kids being a jerk, you know, we have teachers that are educated. I was reminded by a fellow board member for the whole year how smart our teachers, librarians were. That's sarcastic, in case I don't know. But our teachers don't want Ryan to get picked on during school. And they see a couple kids picking on him, then they're going to kind of walk through and talk to them. Or if Ryan's the bully, that teacher's going to have the opportunity to pull them aside and say, what's going on? I think our teachers are educated enough to identify some things, but we get them so scared because they're afraid to ask Ryan something. If it's a female teacher and ask him in a room, I mean, there's all these silly things that our teachers have to go through in their mind. I just think common sense is going out the door on how we help kids. I know as I grew up, if there's a bully in class, it's because he was probably being bullied at home. And another thing that's missing, this can be rough or whatever, what we don't have anymore is if I'm bullying Ryan and he's 2 feet shorter than me and I'm getting the best of it, used to other kids would come in and jump in and say, James, you're not doing that, and they take care of business. And we have kids afraid to stand up for other kids because they don't know what's going to happen. Because absolutely, that's what I was listening. They were told, and we said from the school that I was one of them up there with Rhonda and a couple of us that you absolutely can defend yourself and stand up for somebody else. But again, that's just talk until it happens.
Well, I am with Moms for Liberty, and I would say my take on it is go back to the actual code of acceptable behavior and the discipline plan that's laid out and follow it, right? Implement what's already there, number one. So that's half of it. The other half is parents need to parent, right? The school talking about, the district talking about the whole child, and they want to take care of all of this. They want to feed the kid, they want to dress the kid, they want to parent the kid and social emotional learning the kid and just teach the children, right? Their parents or teachers don't have time and capacity for all of that. Schools need to stay in their lane and parents need to step up. Parents need to parent.
With discipline, I think my opinion is where you can start with the simplest thing. What stops the behavior? For every kid, it's going to be different. And you're always going to have, and when I first started teaching, I worked with probably one of the best principals. She was old school, but she was also common sense. When that letter came out from the Obama administration, she said to us, listen, if the district admin wants us to be aware of how many black boys we're giving suspensions and detentions to. But if they deserve a suspension or detention, we need to write it and take care of business. But what I've seen with teachers, so we come back to stop the behavior, what does it take? You're always gonna have a small percentage of kids, just like in our real society, who are just not gonna adhere to the system. We should keep trying to process and figure out what we can do to help those kids. But we can't let, let's say, 10%. We can't let 10% of the school population keep the other 90% from learning. That's, what's that?
That's happening every day, every school.
Right. So we have to find out what stops the behavior. We need to give teachers far better classroom management training, period. That was a big concern when I went to my master's program for education, was that teachers didn't have good classroom management. It's worse now. And what happens is the teachers don't want to deal with the discipline, so they just kick it to the counselor. And this is where I have empathy for the counselor Howard Connect when I was there, because he was doing circles around the building, trying to constantly put fires out. And every kid, and as my cousin as a teacher said, if 100 kids need counseling, you hire 100 kids for counselors, there would be 200 kids that need counseling. It's just going to keep escalating. And the more he tried to appease these kids, the more he got torn in pieces trying to manage everything. And so you want to stop the behavior. Teachers need better training on classroom management and how to, even their presence in the classroom, how to talk to kids. Because I will defend kids when these people that are proponents of restorative justice say that, kids this and that. The teachers are at times escalating problems. I've seen it in person. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time with inner city kids working with them, and they will yell at teachers, and it is wrong. Okay, and it's really hard when you have a 12-year-old screaming in your face that you just ruined some other girl's life because she was cheating in your classroom and took her work away. Okay. Teachers will escalate that, and that kid loses, and then that kid gets suspended. Okay, and then the numbers go up, et cetera. So there is a real issue too with teacher training, and not every teacher. I've seen it. It doesn't have to be male. It doesn't have to be a tall guy. I've seen some of the smallest petite women be fantastic with their students and how they manage their students. But I think overall, too many teachers just don't have the skills from the classroom management. I think that'll tackle a lot of issues on how they manage the classroom. And then I think we need to revisit how we run school discipline programs. Maybe if I want to be charitable, there's a small place in a very specific manner with a social worker and a counselor for very specific kids with restorative justice in that tight-knit piece. Maybe. But I think we have to solve all these other issues. We got to get kids to stop stabbing and punching each other first. One of the issues I had at Howard Connect was I couldn't get kids to shut up and start and use that word shut up. They would scream at each other constantly, and they couldn't stop. Because if you said something to me, I had to say something back to you. So that's my opinion on from a professional educator, my dad being a dean, all the other stuff is bringing that into play, is that if we can tackle some of those areas and get those things in order, I think we would see a big difference pretty quickly.
Thank you. So this is our last question, and I do want to pass it over to Mr. King, so he can explain a little bit about restorative practices in our county and how they got here, right? Okay, so is it true that incidents that are handled with restorative circles aren't reported in incident numbers?
As far as I can tell.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell. Maybe there's a paper trail I don't know about. Hopefully there is, at least from the counselors or whoever's ISS, whatever it is.
They're supposed to be listed under conference, not under. So if you're looking at an altercation between two and they chose to do a restorative circle, it would be under the conference.
Which really starts to play with the data. Which if you look at the data, the suspensions are down. And my first question every time I see that is, yeah, really. And we don't have a way to track if they're not tracking in one way or another what these behavioral modifications, they're not tracking that. Then we don't know what the real data, what's really going on in the schools, unless you have insiders coming out and saying, this is what's been happening, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big problem I have. You know, there's other things you can do. I mean, I think the biggest thing is maybe that's something else that should be part of this alternative to like, well, we need to do this one. We need actual data. We need to see what's going on, not because we want to hammer these kids, but to help the kids to you know, I know we're a little data collection averse, and I totally get that. The Panorama behavioral board is a real problem. But at least on the surface level, like what's going on in schools, so you can have a better picture of what's actually happening.
Did you want to come out there?
Yeah. So Scarlett was at we had a call meeting last night to talk about this. A lot of this comes up, so I'm gonna start talking about from way back. Restorative practices, when I was a junior in high school, we had restorative practices in our school. I grew up in Alaska. It actually came from the Native American communities. They called it circle justice. And the circle involved a person that, in this case, in schools, to keep from being suspended, had to atone for what he had done. The person that was the victim's mother, a teacher, an administrator, and that they were all in there. They got to speak out against the person. And then at the end, that person had to try to justify why they shouldn't be put out of school. And it's a different day and time. So I was an educator 39 years. I continued last year, my 40th year, training math and science teachers. And now this year I'm District 9 school board. So in the 40 years, it's been a complete change in the type of students that have come into schools. And I can tell you that. But back then it was, you know, few and far between that you sat in one of these circles. You could sit in one of these circles every day in every school. Restorative practice has a good purpose behind it. In 1999, a new term came out to administrators. It's not a nice term, but the medical profession sent it out to us and started, after enough studies were done, crack baby and alcohol babies. They were getting the mainstream now. They were trying to figure out why students were acting differently. Those were two of the things that came around. So then we're talking 1999 there. I became the principal of the adult high school in 2004. And in that process, the adult high school was where, in this case, many students right now should be a part of the adult high school. If they can't handle the high school situation, Scarlett was there last night. I talked about reopening an adult high school. As far as, tell me your first name, Ryan, you made a comment, counselors cannot do therapeutic medicine. They can't. We have 4 or 5 teachers in Hamilton County that are certified as therapeutic counselors. The county right now hopes to get more of those. The program that they're using is called Bridge. So it's in elementary schools for District 9, Harrison Elementary, Snow Hill, Wallace Smith, and Uruguay Elementary. They all share that one therapeutic teacher counselor. And Bridge is basically the students that can't get into Dawn. And they can't get into Dawn because of lawsuits that have extended the process of trying to identify and certify students as mentally, behaviorally disordered, the different things. So it's come around to that point. Dawn is accessible, but it takes literally about 80 different documentations of something to get them at Dawn. So we talked to Dr. Robertson and the assistant superintendent yesterday about getting more bridge programs so that at least in the elementary schools, right now, there are a total of 30 seats in K through 5, 30 seats available for students that have behavioral, what you might want to call behavioral disorder. They want to increase that about 5 times that number by what they said. So that's the goal. They know the bridge program works, but it's just not accessible to very many kids. And they do know that students, even one student, are upsetting the culture at school. Yes.
So are you saying that then the behavior issue students would be removed from their classroom and put in an alternative classroom?
Yes, but not an alternative school.
No, don't.
So right now, one of the bridge programs is housed at Uwa Elementary School. And students from the 4 elementaries go to there. But that's not enough. I mean, they could fill 2 classes or 3 classes. And it's not, so they're hoping to at least get 1 room for every 2 schools right now. So that's what we're looking at budget-wise. We know we need another adult high school. A question here that somebody turned in. How many students are at the alternative school? I can't give you a number now. I can tell you how the alternative school works. So as of December 16th, there were 96 students at the alternative school. That's middle high. But they are only there for in most cases, for a semester or a 9-week, depending on what the time frame is. So right now, I'm not sure how many are there. I have not gone over there since school started back up. But I would bet that half of those students probably are now back at their other schools. And yes, administrators would like those students in many cases to stay at the alternative school. And might have been a good situation for those that were involved at Uwa, but by law, and this is federal law, by law, a student can be put out of school for 1 year, but then must be allowed back into the school system. Doesn't have to be at the school where the offense occurred. And doesn't sound right, but that's why many communities have alternative schools.
So we can agree that what's happening right now is not working. We all
Yes,
agree.
and you're not gonna find very many people we know there's a discipline problem. How it's in both the 2 reasons we're hit on, it's inconsistent from school to school, and it's being appropriated differently than what it maybe should. But he said that very few schools have had the thing, but restorative practices came about by something called ACEs. And ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. So in 2016, they actually sent a specialist into my school, the adult high school, and every student filled out a survey. We had at that time 206 students in the building. Those were students that were not successful at their other high schools, with the exception, we also had students that were very successful but didn't like school. So they knew they could come there and graduate a semester early because we had a December graduation. But out of the 206, we had 75%, right at 150 of those students hit what's called the ACEs red factor, which means that's why they weren't successful in their school. They had a single parent. They were abused as a child. They had, all these things are called ACEs. And that's when restorative practices came into play, when they started bringing in ACEs. And the adult high school was one of the first ones because I asked for that, to try to figure out why were students not connecting at their other schools. Restorative practice, the key term involved is connections. And I know Howard Connect, that's why they named it Howard Connect. They wanted to connect the students with the adults, with their own peers, but also with a future. And that's the idea behind restorative practices. But, you know, the connections you talked about, and I see it from the administrative side, when you were talking about when the teachers were asking them the questions about sitting at home around the family, things like that. It's hard to picture that, but the idea behind that is to try to make a connection with the kid so that they trust you, because it's a proven fact. If one child has one adult that they can trust and count on, they will probably be successful and make it out of school.
So maybe that should be mom and dad.
But the sad thing is, many students now don't have a mom or dad at home consistently, and that's why it came in with what it was.
Well, I have to say, I appreciate you being here. I understand that the intention, there were people that wanted us to be set straight about what's happening. I hope that everybody who's been here sees what we do. Number one, Moms for Liberty people say we want to destroy public education. Is that what it sounds like? We want
Well, I think that's from your national website, that's Moms for Liberty, and actually.
It doesn't say that.
It did in one of the so.
Fine, send it to me. I'd like to see it, because that's not true. The other thing I'd like to say, but I think the discourse is important. It's very important. Truth is important. Data, you know, let's be honest in reporting the incident numbers and what's actually happening. Mom and dad are important. So this idea that the school is going to handle it and hide things from mom and dad, we know that that's happening. So that's got to end. The other thing I'd say is, well, and I've talked to Dr. Roberts, and I think he's trying hard and doing good things. But so when he gives examples and talking about these restorative practices being used at home, we use them in our families. And the way this is described, I absolutely do that with my kids, right? They've got to make amends for what they did to their sibling. The difference is my kids care. They are connections, right? They're connected to their family. They will always be connected to their family. These bullies in a classroom don't necessarily care to be connected to the other students. What they like is they get to say, here's the reason why I did this and I won't do it again, and keep moving on, and then they're repeat offenders.
Thank you. I don't have children of my own, but in 2009, my husband and I got involved. My nephews were going to school out here in Ottawa, and I'm a real estate agent. I was at a listing appointment with a teacher at one of these schools, and I said, "Oh, my nephews go to your school," and she said, "What are their names?" And I told her. She said, "They're the worst case in our school." So I started to ask questions, and long story short, my husband ended up getting custody of my nephews. My oldest nephew had an IEP. What happened is he could not read. He was in 5th grade. He could not read. He didn't have an IEP. He got passed every year. I had to file a suit with the state in order to get him accommodations and modifications. Still, no reading tutor. I had to pay for that out of my pocket. But one thing I wanted to mention, because you said the word trust. My sister was a terrible parent. She's still in mental health disability now, but my nephews have suffered because of what the school did to them, more so than what their parents did. So when I hear restorative justice, I think I'm all for it. I want my nephews to sit every one of these educators down and say, I want that circle with my educators who pushed me through and did not give me what I needed and tried all these other things that honestly did not work. Kids, and I know this from the counselors that we went to with my nephews. Once a week, we went to a counselor for 2.5 years, once a week. So you guys know how many weeks are in a year. So I became kind of an expert at this, talking to this counselor, multiple counselors, school counselors. And what I learned is that kids know truth. And they know when we're BSing them, and they know that a lot of this is BS, and they're taking advantage of it. They want to feel safe, they want rules. That's what makes them feel good. My nephews were pushed through and given, oh, you poor, pat on the head, go on. Didn't teach them to read or write, didn't correct their behavior, didn't tell them that's not going to be permissive in our classroom. And so they were pushed on. And so they literally today, neither one of them are doing well, even though they have 4 years in my home. I planted seeds. God's going to hopefully make those come to fruition. But they both struggled in this prison, what is it, class of prison pipeline we're talking about. Does anybody consider the suicide rate of these kids? Because my nephew would tell me every day, because he couldn't read, that he didn't think he should be alive. He got bullied. He did not want to live. I had to take him to counseling and tell him how much I loved him and give him a safe environment. Safety from the standpoint of there are rules and we have things that we have to do. And he is alive today. If I would have left him and not gotten custody of him, I don't think he would be here today. And I wonder sometimes that restorative practices, these kids who we're just pushing through, patting on the head and saying, oh, we're gonna, sing Kumbaya and get in a circle and talk about things. They need real answers. They need real rules and discipline, because that's what society requires of all of us. We don't have a stop sign that says maybe if you feel like it. I mean, seriously, this is what I'm sick of. And I'm not a parent. I've raised plenty of kids, but they weren't my own, but I've raised the kids who had the difficulties. So I can tell you firsthand that this stuff, while it means well, does not work.
And I'd like to just add two things. I'm sorry, I don't get long. The way you talked about the sort of practice at first, that makes perfect sense, because the offender is the one who they're talking to. I will tell you, any student or anybody now that goes through this in Hamilton County School, the victim feels like they're doing the wrong stuff in the system, and they do, because when you explain it, it's perfect. You gotta sit down amongst our peers and you gotta tell them what you did in this thing and we'll talk about it. Secondly, we cannot allow Hamilton County Department of Education to sit up there like they did last meeting so and blame a virus over the new extra discipline problems. They don't have it in Washington County. They got extra discipline problems in Bradley County. If they sit there and blame a virus, that's why numbers are up. We gotta hold that Department of Education accountable for that. Let them speak us BS.
And I will say, Mr. Walker was truthful, and many teachers had a feeling before. I hope it's not the same feeling with the new superintendent. He truly does want parental input, community input. So, these things aren't a bad thing.
Right, but no, it's important, and I appreciate you joining us. I'm glad that you were here. Hopefully you've seen that we're not, I've been called a Nazi, I've been called, I was called a domestic terrorist.
County student, so another mom's for liberty.
So she doesn't really want to destroy. public
Yeah, I
education.
don't like when our was spitting out saying that none of our kids go to public school.
Right. We got two more. Carolyn's got something, Christy's got something, and I would also say, absolutely having empathy for children from difficult backgrounds. My birth mom was 14 when she had my sister and 16 when she had me. I went to foster care. I was adopted out of foster care. That situation wasn't great either. My sister's been in and out of jail multiple times. I knew that education was my way out. So having a quality education is crucial, but setting those boundaries, because when I was a kid, we still had paddles, right? Now, I never went to the principal's office because I wanted to get paddled, but we knew that happened, right? And I'm not saying that we need to bring paddles back to schools, but I'm saying that having boundaries and consistency are crucial.
I've been a teacher for 32 years.
It helped me.
I don't teach in our schools here. I do a lot of tutoring, but I've got a lot of advanced degrees. Children thrive on discipline.
Structure.
They've got to have a structure. They've got to have consequences to learn the difference. We don't bother with that in Hamilton County anymore. Everything you said about your nephews goes on every day for just about every kid. At the end of this school year, the state has changed the rules. that there will be no more social promotion as in the past. Guess who is the biggest adversary to the teachers want? There's many teachers that are great teachers. I don't teach in that classroom because I can't abide some of the things I have seen other teachers do. I literally heard a teacher who was supposed to be one of the most favorite teachers in the world. And there was a knock on the door of the teacher's lounge, and she found she was asked for, and she went over there like Mary Poppins Sunshine. And as soon as she shut the door, she said, "Oh, what a terrible waste of skin. Why did God bother?" When that is how you really feel, and you pretend to be something else, kids know the difference. They know when you're being truthful. I have a rule with my kids: tell me the truth. Always tell me the truth. I will go with you to any parent, any teacher, the principal. I'll even go with you to the police. And if you've really truly done something wrong, I will try my best to make sure that you get the best deal you can. But at the same time, I will have your back. I had 1,600 children ready to walk out of school when I left because they knew I had their back, every one of them. And you know, I actually asked them, please don't do it. I said, they will hold this against you for the rest of your days. They do not let teachers function the way they did when I was in school. I am 55 years old. I'll be 56. I went to Tyner High School. It's a great school at that time. We were 10% in the top 10% of the schools in the country. Almost everybody I went to school with graduated, and they either own their own business, and most of them actually went on to college and very successful. So one thing I kept hearing y'all say was common sense. Guys, common sense is not common sense. You know what common sense is? Everything your parents are supposed to teach you while you're growing up, particularly between the ages of birth and 8 years old. Okay, it's really learned behavior. Our parents don't parent the way our parents did when we were children. They just don't. They've got an iPhone, they've got video games, or they've got a TV. Something is in their hand or in their face, and if they are home and they don't interact. All this about latchkey kids was in the 90s. There was a lot of latchkey kids, but they were still expected to have that discipline when they got home. So all I'm saying is follow through, show up, and don't let this, without letting children learn how to read as adults, it's a colossal failure on our part.
That's right.
Chrissy.
I agree with you. Restorative practice does not work. We actually went through restorative practice and our meeting fell apart. My daughter was bullied and harassed for a good year. A lot of emails going back and forth with teachers, principals, superintendents, and school board representatives, and just back and forth. Well, she was finally attacked about a year and a half later in the lock. That's her stall. We ended up having a restorative justice meeting, and we all sat in a big circle. And it was me and her stepdad and her, and it was the offender across from us with the parents. It was Karen Glenn at the time. It was the principal of the school. It was her IEP teacher and her soccer coach. And so we all sat in a big circle. And it started out by asking the offender, why did you do this to someone? I don't know. I just wanted to. Are you sorry for what you did? And the whole time she just kept just doing this number. She was mad and upset at us because we ended up pressing charges, taking them to court. And the whole time my daughter's crying in the meeting, the girl was not apologetic. She didn't care. And she basically pointed her finger in my face and said, you're ruining my life. I said, how am I ruining your life? Because you called the police on me and pressed charges. I said, what about what you've done to my daughter for a year and a half? Who has suffered PTSD, depression, We're now homeschooled, we've been homeschooled 3 years, you won't go back to school. They can't prove that they can keep the kids safe. So our restorative justice practice did not work. It doesn't work. At the end of the day, they want the kids to, you know what, let's apologize and let's all be friends. And it doesn't work. The girl that did this to her, every year was attacking other kids. She witnessed a year before this happened to her, the same girl had pulled another kid across the hall floor by her dreadlocks, some of her hair came out, to go with no consequences. So,
And that's what we're seeing. I think we're seeing
Yes.
after several years of these policies in place, we are now seeing the escalated behavior.
and these children that are doing this are not learning anything because they're getting the restorative practice or whatever, and there's no, we got minimal punishment.
Well, so the summary is parents need to understand the code of acceptable behavior and the published discipline policy. They need to ensure that that is being followed at school. And we need to get rid of this restorative practices stuff. At least let's be honest about it, right? Let's be honest about the number of incidents, report them fully. If they can prove that this stuff is successful, then let's have a conversation about that. But if it's not, let's change direction before we get more kids hurt. I appreciate you all being here. If this is your first experience with Moms for Liberty, I hope you found that we do our homework, we provide evidence, we provide the data, and we try to provide value. We're always looking for help. So join us. You get the QR code over there to go to the website, fill out the membership form, sign up for the newsletter. We'd love to have you. Thank you all. Thank you.